I want to have a conversation with a certain number of people in the room. Not everyone, I get that, but more than I think you would guess. Some of us in the room are just starting out in the Christian faith, and you're thinking, I mean, I don't even know what's next. It just seems so complex, so hard to me. Others of you, while some are just starting to get into that faith, others of you are deconstructing that. You're trying to get out of it. I think I heard a stat somewhere between about 60%, 6 in 10 of the people in this room say we've been in a process of deconstructing faith sometime in the last couple of years. About 85% of all of us say we're not leaving the faith. So get that straight. To deconstruct does not mean you're leaving. It just means you're trying to figure out what's baby and what's bathwater. You don't know how much of this is the tower and how much of this is the scaffolding. You're trying to figure this out. Others of you are speaking of a new awakening in your life, something that God is doing just in the last 6 to 8 months. I've heard several of you one-on-one talk about this. You're saying, I don't quite have words for it. I don't have language, but I'm restless, man, and I'm hungry right now, but I'm not quite sure what it's for. Well, the purpose of this morning is to try to put words to that in as short a time as I can, out of respect for the full audience with children. I'll cut to the chase. Sometimes the greatest threat to knowing God is serving God. Now, I'm going to be hard on us a little bit. The greatest threat to knowing God is sometimes serving God. One of the overlooked facts of early Christians is that they were not trying to start a new religion. This is why they had trouble with the Jewish faith, because they came up so intertwined with the Jewish faith. Remember, on the day of Pentecost, when we were born, they referred to the prophecies of Joel, the prophecies of David. They referred to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the 3 patriarchs, and they said that everything that was happening was prophesied, all of it, by the prophets in the Old Testament. They did not see themselves as starting a new religion. But as the Christians began to grow in number, they went from 120 in chapter 1 to 3,000 in chapter 2, to 5,000 in chapter 4, to more than ever in chapter 5. And as they continued to heal people and preach powerful sermons, they got the public's attention. That was where the rub was. The Jewish tradition was trying to find a way, and why not? They were entrusted with the faith. They're trying to find a way of disentangling what this new thing is from the same history as ours. And so when Peter and John healed a man in Acts chapter 3, and then as they continued to heal people in Acts chapter 4, they dragged him in front of the courts and they said, by what authority do you do these things? Remember, that's the key question. We are entrusted with the faith, and you seem to have a different authority. What authority do you speak from? Stop it. And the apostles said, you decide whether it is lawful or not to say these things in public. We cannot help but talk about the things we heard him say and the things we saw him do. And the grace of God was upon them. And the church exploded. One day when one of their preachers, Stephen, was preaching a sermon, it's a remarkable sermon. He goes back to the beginning of the Jewish tradition and starting with their own tradition, argues a case for Jesus Christ. It's more than a chapter, Acts chapter 7. What hurt him was when it was over, he said to his audience, and you're a stiff-necked bunch of people. And by the way, your ancestors killed the prophets and you're breaking every one of the laws you yourself wrote. That's what did him in. They seized him, threw him to the ground, and they picked up large stones and began to throw the stones at him. Before he died, Stephen looked up and said, look, there is one like the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. And then he said to that Son of Man, receive my spirit. And don't lay this sin against any of these people. And then he died. It should be noted that the people killing him were doing so in the name of God. Sometimes the greatest threat to knowing God is serving God. The person who watched the whole thing happen was named Saul. Saul stood there holding the coat while the men stoned him. One day Saul was on a horse riding to Damascus. He's going to round up more people. On the way to Damascus, a bright, blinding light overwhelms him, knocks him off of his horse. He's laying disoriented on the ground, trying to collect himself, get his legs back. And then he hears a voice, and the voice says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul says, who are you? And he says, I'm Jesus, whom you're persecuting. Let the record show that the one talking to him, Paul would later call the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Paul would later say he was the bodily fulfillment of of God himself. And he doesn't know him. Let the record show he is operating in the name of God and he doesn't know him when he meets him. That ought to unnerve us. Is it possible to be so focused on serving God that we'd miss him if he ever came into the room? Paul tells that story in Philippians chapter 3. In the first 3 or 4 verses, he said, I was in that system, that religious system, the people serving God. These are my credentials. This is my resume. And then in verse 7, 8, and 9, he says, all of that changed on the road to Damascus when I met him. And then for the rest of it, he starts talking about counting everything lost and pursuing Christ and becoming like Christ. Paul said there was a religious system and I was good at it. And these are the characteristics. And I point this out because I think these characteristics infect every religion, including Christianity. Anytime we organize anything, even in God's name, these things happen. They're inevitable. One is comparison. Paul says, if anyone has reason to boast, I have more. In religious cycles, we have this habit of comparing ourselves, our abilities, our opinions, our achievements with other people in the room. And we feel good about ourselves as long as those achievements are as good as everybody else. But we're always using everybody else as the measurement. Second, heritage. It helps to have the right parents and then grandparents. And if you were baptized into the faith, even better because you never knew anything else. Third is ambition. We reward success. We reward hard work, status, accomplishments. We know one another's body of work and we respect that in religious traditions. Fourth is perfection. We always wonder what's wrong with us. We always think somebody else's life is better than ours. We have hidden, private, sometimes secret sins, which we never confess, because if we ever confess them in religious circles, it would be like a germ in an operating room, man. It just has no room here. And so we hold them. And Paul said, as for righteousness, according to the law, I was faultless. Well, we're not faultless, and we know our own little secrets. And they gnaw at us. And fifth is reputation. Religious people are famous for measuring their spirituality according to how they think other people in the room are thinking of them right now. It's like when we perform, we don't know if it was a good performance or not until somebody else tells us. We don't think it's a good idea until somebody else confirms that. We don't feel spiritual until we think other people see us as spiritual. It's a dead-end game. And we can play this for years. And while I'm at it, let me just say that no level in the church is immune from this. In fact, it's even worse. When you're 20, 25 years old, you don't have much of a reputation. But the more successful you become, the stronger your reputation is. And you end up chasing it for the rest of your life. You worry something's going to happen to the bronze image which you unknowingly, unwillingly built. That's what success does. Are you with me so far? And Paul is saying, I was in this system. I was like circumcised on the 8th day, baptized into the church. I'm a tribe of the Hebrews. I was baptized into the Wesleyan church. Holy cow. I studied for ministry. I graduated summa cum laude. I don't even know what that is. I've been on their platforms. I've had my name dropped in their circles. And all of this is beep. That's the word he uses. I'll just say crap. If my mother was here, she might be, she would say, don't use that word in a church. I would say, Mother, I'm editing. Even now. Paul said, I had all of these things, and it was crap. How can you say that? Because when I met him on the road to Damascus, I met a person. I knew the system, and then I met the person. So let me be clear about this. I do not think the road to Damascus was Paul's conversion from one religion to another. I think it was a conversion from a system to a person. And you can be in the system all your life and not know much about the person. You can have amazing worship services and not know. When you know the person, listen to me, he is far more unpredictable and complex than you would imagine. You know what he's thinking when he doesn't say a word. Thinking of the old couple, true story, in a nursing home, side by side, watching a talk show. One of them goes, ain't that, what's his face? The spouse next to him says, no, that's, what's his name? And she goes, oh yeah, you're right. That's when you know somebody. You sit at a table and they just look at you. And you can be in the middle of it all going, and then nothing. Because you know what I'm talking about? If Christ is a person, is it possible to know him like that? Paul says, I want to know him like that. 4 rules, and then I'm done. Rule number 1, everybody in this room has an ultimate concern. It's ultimate because it's the first priority for you, and it's a concern because you can't stop thinking about it. Let's be clear about this. Faith is an ultimate concern. Faith is not something you possess, it's something you pursue. It's not something you fall back on, it's something in the middle that holds everything together. Faith is a compulsive interest in primarily one thing. And whenever that thing comes up, it isn't mostly cognitive, it's highly emotional. It captures your imagination and you get fired up about it. Everyone in this room has one, even if you don't know what it is. And sometimes that's success, sometimes it's image, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's health, sometimes it's justice. But there is generally one thing that holds every other thing together for you. Rule number 2, whatever that is, it almost never changes. You can educate it, it can get sophisticated, it can grow up, but it almost never changes. It will sometimes loan itself to another concern as long as that one helps me with this one. You can't change it because it's rooted to desire. And desires are involuntary. You want what you want, whether you're supposed to want it or not. You just do. So the worst thing you can do is sit and pretend that you have a desire you don't have just because you think the system thinks you should have it. Are you still there? But one day there's a reckoning. You run into somebody, him, rather he runs into you. And in that moment, in that dark night, you encounter the living Christ. And for the first time in your life, that one concern becomes just naked before you. And you like crash. That is your worst moment. But it's the beginning of your best moment. Because rule 3 says, while it almost never changes, when it does change, everything else changes. Stuff that you thought was important isn't anymore, and stuff that you thought was just small becomes more important now because it has to do with the one thing you care most about. When your desires change, your values change with them. And when they change, everything in your life changes. And rule 4, when you get it right, you have a holy discontent. Simon Sinek talks about the difference between a finite game and an infinite game. A finite game, he says, is something that is concrete, measurable, can be done by one person and accomplished in one lifetime. When something is infinite, it is abstract. It is immeasurable. It cannot be done by one person, and it can almost never be done in one lifetime. This helps me understand why Paul goes from saying, all of these things I had, circumcised on the 8th day. I was a Pharisee, tribe of Benjamin, all tangible accomplishments. And when he met Christ, the language changed. He started saying, not that I have already obtained these things or have already been made perfect, or I'm not saying that I've arrived. And I read this thinking, what's happened to the man? He's lost confidence. No. The game changed from something finite to something infinite. And when the game changed, everything changed for him. Most of the stuff we are consumed with today is finite in nature. Think about it. First, you wanted to graduate, and then you did. Then you wanted to have a family, and now you do. Then you wanted to start a business. Well, you've done that. Then you wanted to write a book. Well, you've done that. Then you wanted to get elected. Well, you've done that. You wanted to hear your name dropped in circles favorably, and all of that has happened to you like it's happened to me. And do you know what we felt at the end of it? Every one of them. Gosh, I thought it was going to feel better than this. You say the things you were pursuing were wrong? No, they were finite. C.S. Lewis said, this is how you know you weren't made for that. When you have it, it isn't enough. That's how you know you were aiming for something too small for you. Are you okay? Herein is the irony of it all. How is it that pursuing Christ, becoming like Christ, knowing Christ could be so immeasurable, so abstract? That's intangible. I don't get that. Me either. But the stuff you get isn't enough, is it? Is it? Is it? You'll want more. But when you pursue him, all the while, you are discontent. Not that I've obtained all of these things, not that I'm perfect. You will be satisfied. Last story, and I'm done. Told you, hurry. One, I'm in the South. I'm speaking to a bunch of Wesleyans about holiness. The thing's over, and this couple walks up. And the guy's next to his wife. He's in his 20s. And he says, yeah, I have a problem with this holiness thing. I said, yeah, I get that. I said, what is the problem? He said, well, my whole life, it seems like it doesn't matter what I do, it's never enough. I remember him saying, you know, in a theme park, you've got that little thing with the guy's got his finger out like this and says you have to be taller than that finger to get on the ride. He says, I feel like I'm never tall enough. No matter what I do, it's never over. I can never ride in this religion. Standing next to his wife, I said, maybe you're playing the wrong game. I said, are you married? Obviously. He said, yes, of course. How long? 3 years, he says. I said, happily married? Yes. I said, do you love your wife? He said, yes. She said, good answer. I said, do you love her with everything that you have? He said, yes. I said, no, think about it. Everything, buddy. He said, yes. Yes, I do. I said, do you love her enough? Now he looks at her and he goes, no. She says, good answer. I said, how is it that you can love her with all of your life and it's not enough? You don't feel deficient in that? He smiled and said, That ain't how love works, man. Love is hungry. It always wants more. I said, holiness works that way. When you shift from a system that is well-defined to one that is immeasurable, because it's a person you're dealing with, and he is mysterious, and yet all the while satisfying, you never get enough. Well, I tell that story to ask this question. I think there's a number of people in the room that know what I mean by the system. And what concerns me is not those of you in the room that feel like you can't measure up. I've been there. I worry more about the ones of you who think you are measuring up. But it's a system, man. It's a system. It's what they do. They reward their own. Something changes when you leave that and you say, I want to know him, not it. Him. You get both more hungry and more satisfied at the same time. So I'm asking this morning, if you're tired of the system, man, I am. If you're in the room as a teenager, I grew up where you were. I'm 5 times your age. And as much as you hate it, I hate it 5 times more. And some of you in the room that have accomplished things, I have everything now I wanted when I was 20. And gosh, I thought it would feel better than this. When you know him, when you know him, everything changes. I'm going to sit down, and as I do, we're going to sing a song. And as we do that, I'm not asking if you're converted. I'm not asking if you know all about this. I'm not asking if you're a Christian or conservative. I'm just asking, do you want to know him? Are you tired of a system and you just want to know Christ? Full stop. I'd love it if while we're singing, you would just stand to your feet. I know we're going to pray over you when it's over. But for some, let this be a confession, and for others, a testimony. Let's wait on God.